Okay, so why are we using passwords? As we were discussing, right? For most IoT devices, the question was, well, not they don't really care who you are. They have no idea who you are. What they want to know is, are you allowed to do something? Um, if for those of you who are old enough to remember and used Windows 95, for instance, could be configured with a login. But if you didn't want to use it, you just hit escape and you went right around it. Right? It wasn't even control. So mostly on desktop computers, the desktop computer really wants to know who you are because it has all sorts of settings and other things like that that only you're allowed to deal with. And it some privileges in some cases, some role-based privileges, but just the access to your files and your stuff. But in general, lights and light switches, they don't necessarily even they don't care who you are. They care about, is this an authorized device? So, for example, a light bulb cares if the light switch is authorized to turn it on or off. And that's really where it comes down to. If we get around to authorization rather than authentication, often we can realize that the password's not really serving a primary purpose. It's a secondary purpose of providing an identity. So our password's the only way. Well, at this point in the history of computing, the phone is dominant. The smartphone is dominant, and every single IoT device out there has a unique app that goes with it. For better, for worse, this is the case. And the apps certainly don't really need a password. The apps could use many other things. For instance, usually they wind up with some kind of cryptographic context, whether that's an HTTP, a TLS connection, a CoAP connection, all sorts of other customized connections. If you're doing something right, then you usually have some cryptographic keys involved. And so actually that's pretty much you're pretty much done at that point. If you can set up the relationship between the app and the device, then you don't need a password anymore, because the app carries it. There's questions we're going to come back to about recovery and sharing and other things like that. But fundamentally, think about this, that the device doesn't need a password. Maybe the app does. So we get into onboarding solutions. So Juan, this is partly where I'm going here. And a number of different proposals. And actually yesterday, there was a session on onboarding hosted by NIST. Unfortunately, their WebEx failed and I missed half of it. And I hope to catch the recording and put it in as a link. But essentially, there's quite a number of onboarding solutions available for both industrial, consumer, and um, enterprise uses. One of the seemingly most easy, obvious ones is called Easy Connect from the Wi-Fi Alliance, and it has a device provisioning protocol. Um, there are some technical challenges which may mean it's going to not be useful for people, but the essential process is the device, the teddy bear, the webcam that you see there, has a QR code either affixed to it or that it can show on a display of some kind. So this teddy bear doesn't have a display, but you can imagine that your smart refrigerator does. And you scan it with your phone, and this sets up some kind of cryptographic relationship, and you now have a trusted relationship. So, for instance, EAP Noob, which is an IETF spec in progress, does exactly that in a different way than DPP. Um, and there's a number of other things. So, thread commissioning does this in a interesting way, and then actually uses Brewski below for connecting up to the cloud. Amazon and Google have some uh, processes. I don't quite know how they've gone in some place. Amazon now has their own, and Google has apparently given up IoT. Intel SDO again also has an onboarding process, but ironically, in order to get on to the network, you have to first be on the internet to get onto the network. And I'm not quite sure I understand how that works, and I suspect they don't either. But if you're just plugging in a wired device of some kind in an industrial environment, that's actually what it's really designed for. There's a protocol which I'm the author of called Brewski, Bootstrapping Remote Secure Key Infrastructure, and it is targeted for in various ways for all three of consumer, enterprise, and industrial, but primarily enterprise and industrial. Finally, there's an alliance, a working group out of the Zigbee Foundation, I guess they are, called CHIP, And this includes Amazon, Google, Apple, and the list goes on, Samsung, who are trying to basically solve this problem from the home. So it's the connected home internet protocol chip. And what they're doing is behind closed doors. I don't know. I hope we'll find out sometime in the new year about what's going on. But the goal of all of these is to onboard consumer devices without a password onto the Wi-Fi or the low power network. Okay, so you may not be convinced yet that you don't need a password. You may still think, okay, I need to have one. And so there are some revised guidelines as to what to do with them. So the first one is there's no reason to make the passwords expire. There's no reason to make, some set of rules with uppercase and lowercase and special characters and all that stuff. Research shows that basically users don't pick particularly good passwords. They're not particularly more random. They lose them faster, and they mostly don't. It doesn't help them do this. The original guidelines came from a NIST document about 20 years ago. The person who wrote them recanted and realized it was a terrible mistake. Only a couple years after that, but it took a good 10 years, 15, almost 15 years, for that change in message to get out to places. So the NCSC, which is the UK's consumer, you'll have to correct me, Emily, I'll get it wrong again. I know the S is sports somehow.
Well, the NCSC is the National Cybersecurity Center,
Cybersecurity Center.
and the DCMS is now the Department for Digital, Culture, Media, and Sport. So you're right about the sport.
Right. I always trying to figure out how do they do digital sport. I'm thinking it's casinos, but I realize that's the digital doesn't apply to the sport.
Well, I think we're all doing digital sport at the moment.
Yeah, I guess so. So the point is that at this point, there is some very good advice now on how to do passwords from NCSC and also from revised NIST document. And the NIST pages are pretty good. There's a pretty also pretty good. There's a very friendly introduction, I would say, to and even a video there for there. So if you are being forced to do this kind of ridiculous thing by your IT department, you may want to clue them into the fact that this is not good advice anymore, and they're not compliant. And probably one of the biggest pieces of advice, I'll just go to the next line, okay, is that you should just let them cut and paste their passwords, okay? So what this means is that if they're going to pick a bad password, there are ways now, there are databases that you can basically go to, if assuming your device is online at the time, and say, is this a terrible password? And they'll say yes or no, it's a terrible password. Given that you've eliminated the word, password and admin and 1, 2, 3, 4, then sorry, I had one more thing about let them paste. And the key thing is that at this point, if you have devices that are interacting with the user using a browser, then they have a password manager. All the browsers have them. And so you're much better off to let the browser deal with that process and generate a good password that way.